Is Leviticus 18:22 really condemning LGBTQ plus people, or is there a little bit more to the story? If you never met me before, my name is Danny. I'm the pastor of a church called The Well. We meet in person in the St. Louis, Missouri area, but we also meet regularly on TikTok. You can go follow us and find us. And I spend a lot of my time advocating for LGBTQ plus inclusion and preaching a theological perspective that helps those that are maybe more traditional or conservative grow in that without throwing the Bible and their spirituality out, helps those that are maybe not religious find out there's a God that loves them and that isn't so obsessed with these rules and rituals that we've been taught, and engages people in this messy middle area of faith and spirituality where I actually think the growth can happen. And so someone in my comments maybe a couple months back said to me, show me the evidence that God would actually be LGBTQ plus inclusive. And I didn't respond for a while, and he kept jumping into my DMs and my comments saying I was afraid and I was nervous and I was scared. That's not true, but here is the reality. This is a meaningful topic. It is a personal topic. It's not a debate. This is flesh and blood. These are real people that we're talking about. This isn't some hypothetical. This is real life. And so I want to take my time to do it well, to create good content, to be thoughtful and provocative in what we talked about in ways that spurred all of us, whether you agree or disagree, towards greater connection to the greatest commandment that Jesus gives us, to love our God and our neighbor. And so that is my greatest hope with this. And with that in mind, let's dive in to Leviticus 18:22. So if you're not familiar, Leviticus 18:22 says this, that it is detestable for man to have sexual relationships with another man as he does with a woman. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but depending on your translation, it may sound something like that. And here's something that's important for us to realize as we're reading this. And I want to get into some stuff about what detestable means and the language and how that actually matters as we're reading things. We're not just reading words on a page. But before we get into that, let's get into the context, like what's happening here. And what I would argue, and most scholars, conservative and progressive, would agree that this is not a universal mandate that is being given. This is a part of a holiness code that is being given throughout the book of Leviticus to the readers in its time. And I say this oftentimes when I'm preaching to my congregation, that the Bible is for us, but it is not always written to us. And that is important for us to understand. When we're reading Leviticus or any book in the Bible or letter or poetry or whatever's happening within our Bible, it is for us. It can transform us. It speaks to us. We find value in spirituality and meaning as we glean what is in the words of those pages. But it is important to not confuse that none of these things were written to us. If it's a letter in the New Testament, there was a real life audience. Going into Leviticus and this holiness code that's being written in this book, it is written to a specific culture in a specific time and a specific audience. And so why is that important? Well, when we're talking about the Bible thousands of years later, as we're talking about what it means for us to relate to God and one another, to embrace this greatest commandment that Jesus gives us to do both of those things, it's important to understand what kind of text we're reading. And in this specific text in Leviticus, specifically in 18:22, we are being given a holiness code to God's people, a real blessing to them, has real life contextual implications, but it's given to them in their time and their place. And you can make an argument that Scripture is once and for all and applies then and now, but I don't see many people putting that into play with the other parts of the holiness code found in Leviticus. And so we have to be consistent. And even if we're being consistent, there's obvious evidence that in this passage, in this part of the Old Testament, in this part of the Bible, something contextual is happening for those people in that time that's not specifically relating to me here in my time today. But now let's get into the language. Let's talk about what detestable means. Now, the Hebrew word detestable, which is the Hebrew word toeve, and I'm not a Hebrew scholar. I did study Greek and Hebrew in seminary, but there are great people on TikTok like Pete and Jared over at the Bible for Normal People and their entire team that put together great scholarship and work on what is happening within this. And this Hebrew word detestable, toeve, is talking about really a ritual act. This cleanliness and this work that is happening within this kind of ritual cleanliness and uncleanliness. There's ritual implications here, and that's important. But you might be saying, like, Well, why is that important? Well, it is ritualistic and more of a mandate and far less a universal principle or universal practice or even universal law given to God's people. And this is important because when we look into Leviticus, and there's 600 plus laws in Leviticus, in the Levitical law, right? And we don't look at many of them the same way we look at this one. And we would say that's because they're rituals, they're contextual, they're not universal. And for whatever reason, Christians have jumped through hula hoops and done spiritual gymnastics to somehow reconcile this passage being in its own bucket. But in the same way that we look at the other ones with context and ritualistic detestability, not this universal implication for all time and for all humanity, we have to look at the same thing that's happening here, which is there is cultural significance and ritual significance to what's happening here, not a universal mandate to all time and to all people. So if you found this video insightful and important at all, I'd invite you to like it, to share it, to comment on it, help other people. I don't know how the algorithm works, but help other people engage with this. But friends, I'm going to be diving into different ones of these clobber passages over the next several weeks, and I hope you'll join me on this journey. I want to learn a lot. I want you to learn a lot. Whether you're conservative or progressive, not religious at all, I think that there's going to be something here for you, and I hope you'll join me on this journey. I'll see you next time.